Hello and welcome everybody. Welcome to today's webinar, Manage Mentoring versus Sponsorship, Unlocking the Key to Enhancing Women's Career Velocity. I will give you a minute to get settled in and we will get started. Okay, so before I hand it off to the presenters, I just want to cover a few technical details, just in case you haven't joined Acro webinar in the past. We use a Zoom webinar, which is similar to Zoom meetings, except that your cameras and your microphone is going to be off by default. So to interact with each other and with the presenters, you have two options. So for discussion, and general comments, you can use the chat button. If you want everybody to see it, please make sure to select everyone in the drop-down menu. If you have a question, please use the Q&A button. So not the chat button, but the Q&A button instead. And you can ask questions, you can ask them anonymously, and you can view and comment on existing questions. And you can ask your questions at any time. The presenters will read the questions towards the end, or however they choose fit. And so now, without further ado, here is your moderator, Melissa.
Hello, everyone, and Happy New Year. Welcome to our first Acro Women's Caucus webinar on mentoring versus sponsorship, unlocking the key to enhancing women's career velocity. And we have three incredible speakers today. So first, I'd like to introduce Dr. Lauren Ledbetter Griffith. So Dr. Griffith is a graduate of the University of Georgia with a PhD in adult education and certificates in human resources and organizational development and qualitative research. Today, she is an extension leadership specialist where she facilitates internal and external leadership programs and serves as a graduate faculty member. She has authored more than 50 publications, including with Harvard Business Review, for her research on women's leadership. Her interest areas include women's leadership in agriculture, generational differences in communication, and organizational development. Next, we have Solange Charas, also doctor, PhD. She is the founder and CEO of HC Moneyball and an adjunct professor and a governance researcher and thought leader. She has served on public company boards and has held the chairperson role for audit and compensation committees. She has also served on private for-profit, nonprofit, and higher education boards. She's an adjunct professor at Columbia, USC, and NYU, and has published or been cited in more than 250 research and practitioner publications, including more than 70 academic citations that include Harvard Business Review, Forbes, and USA Today. And last but not least, we have Dr. Rubina Malik. She is a scholar, strategic advisor, thought leader, and a mentor. As a champion of career sponsorship and leadership development, she is an expert in helping organizations enhance the engagement, retention, and promotion of diverse candidates. She's a TEDx speaker and a popular guest speaker at conferences and podcasts, and frequently published in industry magazines, including Harvard Business Review. To fulfill her passion and commitment to the community, she's on several nonprofit boards that actively support education and equity-based incentives. So these are three amazing women that are we're so happy to welcome here with us today. And without further ado, I will let them take over.
Thank you so much, Melissa.
Thank you, Melissa. I would just want to say we are delighted to be here today and just to spend this time with you and to talk with you about your careers and women's careers, and to really just set the stage for what we want to say. I think all of us have some personal experiences when it relates to our careers. If you want to say hello to people in the chat and maybe just write something about what your career aspirations are. We would love to just kind of get the chat flowing and going a little bit as we begin. Rubina, Solange, do you have anything to say to kind of help us get flowing and going?
No, I just thank you for being here today. And one of the things is, look, it already says something about you being here, you showing up. that you're committed to making sure that you've got the tools and the skills that you need to go to that next level. So I really invite you to take notes. We're going to ask you a question at the end and look and see how can this apply to you. So that's what I'm going to leave you with, is how can you use this tool to go to that next level?
And I'm going to say, even though this is an age-old issue, gender-driven career issue, I am super optimistic based on what we're seeing in the economy and in terms of the labor supply, that this is our time. And we need to, hopefully what you'll learn in this session is how to reframe the way that you think about career pathing for yourself and for others if you're a manager.
Excellent. So I love to see you all, what you're saying here. You're looking at wanting to move into executive leadership roles. You're wanting to help people on your team succeed. You are wanting to serve, your university or your college and continue in leadership roles there and serve on boards. Sarah said you want to open your own business. All right. I love to see that. So keep them coming. And just let's take a minute as we begin to just dream and think about ourselves for a moment. I know as women, we spend a lot of time thinking about other people. So this really gets into the crux of us thinking about us. And so the title of our talk today is Mentoring versus Sponsorship, Unlocking the Key to Enhancing Women's Career Velocity. So we are going to really take you through what it means to have a mentor relationship, what the difference between that is and a sponsorship relationship. We are going to talk a little bit about the career pathway as a woman, what we typically see from women, what we typically see from men, the difference there. And then we're going to talk about how to leverage relationships in your social network to enhance your career success. And so I think that is all the things we're going to cover today. Do you all have anything else exciting, Rubina or Solange, to add to that?
No,
I think we're in good shape.
yeah.
Okay.
I do want to just comment on a comment. I love what Virginia just said. She said, I'm very happy in my current role, but I'm very interested in being an effective mentor and colleague for colleagues and or students. So Virginia, thank you for being that advocate. So hopefully you'll find some ways to be that effective advocate as well as a mentor.
And a sponsor.
Yeah.
Yes, very good. Okay, so let us, if you don't mind, tell you all just a little bit about who we are and the personal experiences maybe that we've had that led us to this point and to do this research and to collaborate together. So hi, I'm Lauren Griffith from Cochran, Georgia. I grew up in agriculture with an agricultural background. And what I noticed going through agriculture was there was a lot of women involved in agriculture, but mostly men were in leadership roles. And so this was very interesting to me as a young woman. And so throughout graduate school, I began studying women deans and directors of colleges of agriculture across the US. And I asked them what was critical in them enhancing their leadership skills. And they talked to me about everything from people that had sponsored them and allowed them, had faith in them that they could do the leadership role that they were chosen to do, to mentors who had guided them, to just being tough. And so it fascinated me. And today I work with leadership development programs in the College of Agriculture. And I also have my own consulting business called Focus Leadership Solutions, where I go in and work with teams and individuals and help them become the best they can be. But my research really is all about women's leadership and team development, and I also do some work with generational differences in the workplace. So I met Rubina, this is my segue, in graduate school, and we began having lots of great conversations about this. And so now I'll let you meet her and learn a little bit more about her.
Great. Thank you so much, Lauren. Yes. What brought us together was our interest in mentoring as well as sponsorship, and she doing her research and I was doing my research. And my love is around mentoring, coaching, and career sponsorship. and how women and minorities can use that in their in the workplace to especially go into the leadership pipeline. And you know, my interest in this area, it goes back, you know, people talk about equity, 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 and I'm like, I've been talking about this since I was a young girl. Like, I remember graduating from college and there was the glass ceiling, and I was like, I'm going to break that glass ceiling, right? And so I attempted that in corporate America for a while, and ended leaving there, worked for a nonprofit, came into academia, and ironically, I'm still impacting that, right? Like, if we think about it, I'm just doing it from a different way, through research, through being a practitioner. I have my own leadership and development firm as well. I work with SMEs and Fortune 500 companies, and helping their individuals, emerging leaders, to go to that next level, and especially women and minorities, because that's my passion. I want to help people be retooled, reskilled, whatever, to go to that next level of leadership. And what does it take to do that? And I'm going to be honest, I've had coaching, I've had mentoring, and I've had sponsorship making an impact on me, and especially mentoring, having migrated here when I was 8 years old. I know, I sound like one of y'all. Yes, I'm a Southern. I grew up in the South in Georgia and Atlanta, and but I bring all of that expertise and all that experience and all of that didn't work into my research and into our conversation today. So thank you so much for having me.
And I guess I'll pick it up from here. So
Oh, yeah, please. I guess I
So-
should have passed it on to you.
Rubina is the node for this threesome. She and I met while I was still doing my PhD, and she was still doing her PhD at a training session, and we just resonated with one another, and we kept in touch all of these years. You know, I'm thinking about the three people that are on this panel, and I think it's a perfect representation. So you have Lauren, that really talks about something that's very industry specific, that has implications for women's careers. You have Rubina, who really focuses on individuals, right? So we have industry focus and we have individual focus that really looks at how individuals can really step up and be self-actualized through mentorship and through sponsorship, and what that means for careers. And my focus is really at the business level, at the enterprise level. And my passion is understanding how human capital trends in the aggregate are driving economic value creation for organizations, and looking at the relationship between how much organizations invest in human capital initiatives and their return on investment in those initiatives, really in the context of different stakeholders, investors, employees, customers, communities, and strategic partners, and the transparency around the return on investment in those initiatives. So I really look at it in the aggregate and at the enterprise level. So you have enterprise, individual, and an industry-specific representative. What we found in our research is that DE&I, or the amount of diversity in an organization, is statistically significantly linked to an organization's human capital return on investment performance, which is an economic indicator of the effectiveness and efficiency of the collective human capital performance. So HCROI is a financial indicator like ROI or ROS or ROE. And what we found is that there is a direct correlation between how diverse an employee population is and how well human capital in the aggregate does, which in turn drives profitability for organizations. And our big challenge in organizations is the pipeline, right? The talent pipeline. specifically around gender-based talent. And that's why I'm interested in this topic. So Lauren and Rubina, their field of research is adult education, adult learning. Mine is in finance. And how do these two things come together? Stay tuned and we'll show you how. So with that, I think we can get moving.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for setting us up there. Okay, so let's start off by busting some myths. And before we do that, I have to say hello to Angela, who says she's a farm girl, FFA, and 4-H, kindred spirit out there. So thank you for that. Okay, so here we have some myths, and I'm going to assign some numbers to them. If you want to put a number in the chat of which one you hear the most. Women lack career ambition, the queen bee syndrome, number 2. Women lack career ambition is number 1. Queen bee is number 2. And then caregivers place family obligations above work, number 3. So while each one of us talk about something here, I would love for you to type in the chat the one that you hear the most. Okay, so I'm going to talk about women lacking career ambition. Now, I think this is a perfect one for me to talk about because I grew up in a rural community. And in a rural community where I grew up, which was full of agriculture, women worked around the home. More often than not, you could find them. They were always working. Now, were they working for pay? Maybe not. But if their husband was a farmer, they might have been working outside in the field. They may have been running the home. They might have been running the books for the farm. But more often than not, if somebody, graduated high school and you wanted to know what they wanted to do, it wasn't something that was like a conversation that we had as much. I think that, women maybe assumed even with our mothers or our grandmothers, they could be teachers or nurses, and in the 90s, 2000s, things started changing a lot. But you still kind of hear that old, well, women just, they just really don't know what they're supposed to do, or they don't have a plan. But, even me growing up in the 1980s, I'm 40. My parents said, hey, you can be whatever you want to be, right? So things started to change at that point. But people still talk about that women don't have career ambition. And I believe that is absolutely not true. Untrue, because if you look at the whole workforce, women comprise half of the workers. So they're out there working. And I don't know if I've ever met a woman who doesn't want to do a good job. So this just seems totally silly, but people still say it. Okay, on to the next one.
So I'm going to talk about the queen bee syndrome. And I think this is a myth that's perpetuated by men that don't want women around them. So I'm a baby boomer, so I'm already old and I've been working since I've been 13 years old. So I've been in the workplace for a long, long time. And the workplace, especially in corporate America, and, as Lauren just said, in the agricultural sector as well, has predominantly been male dominated and male oriented. And I know so many men that are my generation, in their 60s and 70s, that really think about work as a club. And they're very particular about who they want to let into that club, especially at the board level and in senior management level. And I think men have perpetuated this silly myth that women, when they get into a leadership position or they get higher up in the organization, don't want other women around them. They want to be the queen bee. And I think that if you look to your left and to your right and you think about your careers, you will see that that is absolutely not true, that women actually want to support other women for success. And maybe, there's an anomaly or two out there where, you just run into a ruthless woman. But for the most part, I think this is a myth that men really want to perpetuate as a way to not have to hire or promote women into senior ranks. And that, that's a myth. That's absolutely not true. And last but not least, Rubina.
Yeah, thank you so much. And then there's the myth of caregivers, women as caregivers, and they have a place and they have that obligation to take care of their family. And I mean, I'm 29 and a half, 0.1. My birthday's coming up on Friday. So, I mean, I think I understand this a little bit. I'm joking. I do actually understand this myth. And having been a caregiver myself, I took care of my mother, for years until she passed. But that whole myth that women have the obligations and they have to stay home, or they have to choose. They have to choose to be home or be a caregiver. And right now we are in a world where we're sandwiched. A lot of us are sandwiched in. We have our families, then we have our parents, and then we have our career, and we're supposed to take care of all of it. And I think women do take care of all of it. So the myth that they have to choose isn't necessarily the women's stigma. It's actually the stigma of the workplace and the stereotypes and the community and the society, because women are able to navigate that with help, with support. So with that stereotype, not only is it a myth that's not supporting women to move up into the organization, it's also not allowing women to have support to take care of their family as well as their parents as a caregiver. So that's a myth as well, because women are ambitious. They do want to come back, even if they have a family. They want to, if they've off-ramped, they want to ramp back up. And it's not true that they are so caught up in taking care of their family that they don't want to work or they don't want to move up into leadership roles.
And let me amplify that. I think there is a social norm issue, a systemic issue. As Rubina said, that women aren't really supported to the extent that men are. Here's an example. When COVID happened and we went into lockdown and men had to work from home, all of a sudden companies were giving workers allowances to hire caregivers or to buy computers. Women work from home as well, but we're never given those things. It wasn't until men were forced to work from home that organizations all of a sudden saw that they had to support the work from home worker. And that's a social norm issue. And I think, the more women we get into senior management, the faster that's going to change.
Yes. And speaking of, women in senior management, I'm going to just transition here into our next bit of data. That, what we found through our research, what people have known for years, is that women are historically underrepresented in the top ranks of business and management. And so traditionally, we do see people that are in leadership roles that don't look like us. And, so I love what Solange talks about with systemic hegemony, like people perpetuating the idea that we as women are not fit for a leadership position because we want to stay at home, or we don't really have ambitions, or we're trying to be better than everyone else or something like that. And no one likes us. Okay. And so I think it's very interesting that we want to bring light to that. And so really it's all about, trying to amplify that these things are untrue, and that women are capable and talented. And as a matter of fact, the businesses perform better when women are in leadership roles in conjunction with men. So globally, the percentage of women in senior management roles in 2021 was 31%. That's the highest number ever recorded. If you want to go back and look at the data, you'll see that forever and ever, it was 14%, 15%, 16% on a good year, And since probably 2018, we really started seeing some things shift. The pandemic flipped things over on its head. And it was a very interesting time for women. And so we're seeing now more women than ever, but we're still seeing 31% globally. And 26% of CEOs and managing directors were women as compared to 15% in 2019. So we're seeing the numbers inch up. Fortune 500 companies reported 23 women CEOs in 2021, with 6 of those being women of color. So I think that we can see that women of color are really historically underrepresented at the top. And it's really important, especially for women of color, to have a social network that's going to amplify their voice and to allow them to achieve the goals that they want to achieve in their career, because it's not something that you're going to say, it's not going to happen on its own. So what can we do as women to support other women into amplifying their voice and to finding the career that they want to have? Before we go there, we just need to know a little bit more about a typical woman's career pathway. So I'm going to just dive into that, unless Rubina or Solange have anything else they want to just add to that introduction of the research.
Just a little tidbit, a little, data factoid. The numbers that you showed were for corporate America.
Mhm.
But if you look at the Small Business Administration, the SBA, they report that almost 80% of all new businesses are started by women. So good for us in the United States that we are taking control of our own destiny by starting our own businesses, but we are woefully underrepresented in corporate America.
Yes. Who can blame us? Because it's so hard sometimes to work within the system, right? Good grief. Okay. So we are going to create our own system. And I love that. So
I was going to add something. I'm sorry, Lauren, I was on mute. I was sitting here
go
talking.
ahead.
And of course, I said the most brilliant thing in my whole career, and I was on mute, but it's okay. I think COVID actually helped women as well to put the spotlight on them when it comes to entrepreneurship, right? I think they got more creative, and I think there's more opportunities, like whether it's working remote or working from home or what have you, to be able to be more creative, to be able to do more things. So I agree with the statistics that were shared around the small businesses and how that's impacted women's empowerment.
It helped us in that sense, but it hurt us in the corporate world, because most
so many
of
women
the
left.
layoffs and the resignations were statistically higher for women than it were for men. And in fact, there was a phrase thrown around called the she session during COVID, that it's, the she's that got hurt. Research was done that said that the number of women that left the workforce during COVID basically put us back 40 years. But I think we're coming back. We're not back to the pre-COVID level of employment, but we're getting there. And hopefully we'll, steamroll right past the pre-COVID numbers.
Yes. So women's participation in the workforce has dramatically increased since the 1960s. And so now women today, we can say we enjoy a broad range of opportunities to earn a wage, continue our education. We might delay our marriage or childbearing. We might remain at home as a caregiver or cycle in and out of the workforce to meet the changing demands of our families or things around us. But however, scholars have long articulated that the women's workforce decisions are not made freely, really based on personal preference for paid or unpaid work, but rather women's long-term pathways of work are structured by their early home environment and their socioeconomic advantage or disadvantage, our own beliefs about how and whether we should work, opportunities that are around constraints in the work and the family life. And so, moreover, work conditions vary significantly from woman to woman. And even things like having access to paid sick leave or having control of your schedule, having consistent total working hours. So I would just say that when we study women at work, it's a very complex system. And so when we look at a path of a traditional career pathway, it could look like one of these lines here. And you can see that the lifespan of the woman from 25 to 45. And you can see throughout that there are different shifts and changes that women experience in their career. Some women opt to stay at home, others tend to increase their work. Perhaps their children are at home for a little while, or there's a situation where they need to be at home and then they're working less, and then they end up working more when the children go back to school, or if they're caring for a loved one that needs support and then they, pass or something, then the woman goes back to work. And so there's entries and exits. And there's also some research that says that if your spouse has a very demanding job and you have a job as well, you tend to overwork yourself as well as a woman. So that's very interesting because, you might assume, well, that person would work less, but actually it's the opposite of that. Women with spouses who work more than 40 hours a week tend to also work more than 40 hours a week.
And here's another interesting little factoid. The highest level of underemployment in the United States is women over the age of 45. And what's really interesting is women over the age of 45 tend to be better educated, more experienced than the average of any man across his career lifetime. So there's a lot of talent that's left on the sidelines that organizations should be tapping into, which they're not. And that's also part of the mentorship, sponsorship conundrum.
Yes, absolutely. That's an amazing point. And so when you're thinking about a traditional career pathway, as it's been illustrated, perhaps, or explained to you by someone else in your life, they may have explained it like this. And so when you study the traditional career pathway, those studies are taken from mostly men, and you're going to see a natural climb. They start, the person starts, practical experiences gained, and then they just climb through the ranks until one day they become the partner, of the firm or of the corporation or of the business. And the seniority is rewarded, the time spent with the company is rewarded, and then that person, rises to success, if you will. And so just flipping back, you can see kind of the difference in how the entrances and the exits might work for both of those. And so I think it's really interesting to think about that from a feminine perspective. We're not any less qualified or, anything knowledgeable. I love what Solange said, women over 45 are some of perhaps the most knowledgeable. We're not any less qualified or knowledgeable if we've had to step away or step back in or transition, and then she says this is great. Women's careers are more spatial, men's are more linear. Absolutely. So we just wanted to illustrate that as we began talking through the research here. And so I love this quote by Margaret Chan, and then I'll turn it over to my colleagues here. She says, the way I look at it, speaking as a woman, I understand what it means to be a wife and to be a mother, and also to be a career woman, and the multiple roles that women can play in society if given the opportunity is really a tremendous asset. And I absolutely believe that. And one of the best sayings I've heard is, if you want something done, give it to a busy mom, right? As a mom myself to 2 young children, I just put it on my to-do list and somehow it gets done, right? We're always working, always trying to get it done. And I think we can bring a lot of value to organizations if organizations can recognize the value we bring as a part of that. So here we go. We'll transition into why is this an issue, and why do we need to understand how to leverage social networks for our career success?
Great. Thank you, Lauren. And if we look at why, research showed that, you know, women are underrepresented, not because they're over mentored, but they're actually under sponsored. And that's not having that advocacy actually impacts women to move up. So if you think about it, when it comes to, as human beings, let's be honest, we're going to hire people that look like us, that maybe even be from the same town. I mean, you automatically get a connection, right? Like, you know, Lauren and one of the young ladies who said, hey, you know, I'm a farm girl too. Automatically there's a connection. So what happens? We have men on top. What do? They automatically bring other men with them, as well as men are go ask. They'll be like, hey, can you? And then they get advocated for. Versus with women, they're like, oh yeah, here's a mentor. Let him help you. So that's what we were looking at. And why is this happening? Why is this important? And why at this time our leadership roles were not filled and women not being put into the pipeline and or hired into those leadership roles. So as I said, the areas are mentoring and sponsorship. You know, women are mentored, over mentored and under sponsored. So when we're looking at mentoring is a passive role. So in mentoring, you're cultivating a relationship and you're getting advice. So they're actually helping you to craft a vision, a career for your career. They're helping you to navigate, like, hey, you know, make a left here, maybe make a right here, but watch out for that pole. And when you make that right. And so mentors help you to navigate, but not necessarily help you to affiliate. And that is sponsors. Sponsorship is more of an active role. The person who's being sponsored or the person who's sponsoring is actively taking action by advocating, by, hey, have you looked at Lauren? Have you looked at Melissa? Have you looked at Sarah for this role? They're actually advocating behind closed doors. The names are being dropped. It's not, a mentor may not be dropping any names. They're like, again, they're just advising. So sponsorships can advise, but also advocate for your career. And they actually have influence. That's the other thing about sponsors, is they actually have some sort of influence as they're advocating for you, that their advocation is going to have some weight because of the influence that they have. And sponsors also tend to help drive your career vision versus help craft it. So again, sponsors have influence. And if we're looking at the why, if women aren't connected with sponsors who have influence to make change, that may have influence to help them to go to the next level, and they're just being mentored, they're not being supported and they're not being moved up with velocity.
So let me just step in here and create a little bit of a context. So what we're saying is there's a distinction between mentorship and sponsorship, or mentoring and sponsoring. And we feel that this is one of the things that explains why women aren't getting ahead in the workplace. And the distinction is really gender oriented. So we've now defined the difference between mentoring and sponsoring. We're going to talk about the differences from a gender perspective, the natural behavioral inclinations of men and women. And then we're going to talk to you about how you can trace the differences based on two different types of theories, adult learning theory and social exchange theory. So just to give you a little context for how to place what you're hearing.
Thank you.
So who's
Yeah.
talking to this slide?
Yeah, and so I'd be happy to talk about, like, let's talk about the differences for a minute. You know, when we're talking about men and women, obviously, how we behave in a corporate environment are actually different. So for instance, men, they naturally create sponsors. They naturally create sponsorship. So they build these relationships inside of what we call what we've researched is the social exchange theory, okay? I'm gonna help you, you're gonna help me, and we're going to support each other. Now, men also are more likely to ask for help. So they're going to go, you know, Joe's going to go up to John and say, hey, John, I see that you had that marketing position open. Do you mind putting my name in the hat? Versus a woman may not do that. She may say, like, let me work really hard. Let me see if I get noticed. And she doesn't get noticed because she's not asking. Because women tend to be more agreeable and focus on others and have more empathy and concern. And they're the ones who want to help and contribute versus the men, they want to be the center of attention. They want to take action and they'll speak before they're even thinking. I mean, I know for me, like I've literally seen this in action. Like one of my, actually we went to school with him. Like he would just be like, yeah, I'm going to apply for this senior vice president role. And I'm like, but you don't have any, I'm thinking in my head, but you don't have any experience, right? Like I'm looking through the qualifications or whatever, but you know what? Like that didn't matter. He was still applying for it versus a woman, or even maybe I would even just confess, even for myself, if I may have had 99 of the qualifications they wanted and accept one, and I would be like, oh, I don't qualify for this. So men also are willing to take that risk. They're willing to ask for what they need versus women where we're more agreeable, we're more, you know, out to help others versus taking care of ourselves as well.
Yes, and so I'll say that too. According to the Big Five personality model, you're going to see that agreeableness pops out more often in women. And so that really starts from childhood. And we've got research on how boys and girls communicate. Boys will place their chairs side by side and they'll talk about competition. You know, how can we build the tallest tower, or how can I race you? Girls will place their chairs face to face and they talk about things they have in common. They talk about playing together. And so you can see just how culturally we, perhaps however you want to say it, comes together for boys and girls, create a sense of self, and women's sense of self is really created around inclusiveness, community. And so mentoring relationships just seem more natural for women. But what we're saying is we don't think that that's going to get us ahead as much as in addition to what we need, right? Mentoring is awesome, but we also need sponsorship. And so let's think about that, you know, the difference here and the behaviors. So if you guys want to go through what this means.
Sure, I'll start. Rubina, you jump in.
Please.
So when we did our research, when we came together to try to understand what is the distinction between mentoring and sponsoring, and we began to understand that there are two theories that really explain the behaviors and the outcomes associated with each. We wanted to actually understand more about the characteristics of both mentoring and sponsoring. So this is in the article that we wrote and was published, and we'll give you a link to that. And it essentially goes down each area, mentoring and sponsoring. And the first thing is this underlying theory. So mentoring is really about adult learning. And Rubina did a good job talking about some of the characteristics, behavioral characteristics around how people get mentors, right? It's really finding somebody who will help you develop professional capabilities and who are altruistic, right? Who want to just help you for the sake of helping you. So there's no economic underpinning to mentoring. It's really altruistic. And the actors, both actors in this exchange, both the mentor and the mentee, get psychic income, right? They get to say, oh, I did something good for somebody else. They get knowledge. They both get attention from one another. They build affiliation. And really, they're doing it altruistically for the sake of mentoring. And the outcome is really about professional development, right? But it isn't focused on career. It's focused on individual and personal development. And the expected rewards for a mentoring relationship is the cost can actually exceed the benefit for the mentor. So mentors can invest a lot in their mentees, and they really expect nothing in return. That's why it's altruistic. However, for sponsoring, we figured out that sponsoring is really part of, really falls into the social exchange theory. And that's economically based theory. So when we look at the types of interactions, it's not just a dyad. It's not just the relationship between me and the mentee, the mentor and the mentee. It can have multiple actors. It could be my supervisor and a supervisor or a manager from a different department, or even somebody outside of the organization. That sponsoring is really a different animal in and of itself. And that's where we think women run into problems, because they equate mentoring and sponsoring together. They conflate the two, and they're actually very, very different. The types of communication in the relationship is pretty, it's known in the organization when someone is taken on, when a sponsor is taken on a sponsee, right? It's pretty overt.
Right.
Whereas for mentoring, it's kind of private. A person will approach somebody else and say, oh, I think I can help you. Or a mentee will approach a mentor and say, I really admire you. Can you help me? But it's usually a pretty private relationship, whereas a sponsoring relationship is pretty overt. So a sponsor will make it known that they're sponsoring somebody. The interaction required goes beyond the dyad. We need the organization to actually support that sponsoring relationship, because we need to know where the jobs are and we need to know where the career paths are. And what that benefits to the actors are, they get knowledge, attention, which are the same as in mentoring. So that's why it can be kind of confusing. But what really comes out of it, the benefit for the actor, the sponsee has an opportunity for advancement, and the sponsor is counting on some type of economic reciprocal future benefit. That's why men have a much easier time with a sponsoring relationship, because it's inherent that if I help you, I expect you to help me in the future. That's why we talked about the Big Five personality model, that extroversion is really eat or be eaten, right? Winner takes all. And that's how men think. And, again, it's bad to use generalizations, but just, sort of amuse us for a moment and let us go down that path. Men really think about their own personal advancement and what they need to do in terms of contracting to make sure that happens. And that's why sponsoring happens so naturally between men, because as I'm giving value, I'm expecting value in return. And women think about the collective, right? That's the difference between the hunter-gatherer. Women think more in the collective benefit and not the personal benefit. So that sponsoring relationship does not come naturally. And what is important in the sponsoring relationship is that the benefit for the sponsor has to exceed the cost of his or her investment in sponsoring somebody. So somewhere along the future path, that sponsor is going to look for a payout or a payoff from the person that they helped in their own personal benefit. And that's the other thing that stops women from generating sponsoring relationships, is that we naturally don't like to make promises into the future that we are not certain we can keep. We like to work within our domain space where we can control what's going to happen in the future and not make promises that we're not sure that we can't deliver on in the future. Whereas men are very comfortable making promises that they're not sure that they can deliver on. They take that chance. It's part of their natural process. So somebody wrote, what can we do to help women get sponsors? And we're going to get to that. But the idea is you have to reframe your thinking from having an altruistic relationship to having a relationship that has an economic benefit for both parties, and move out of that comfort zone into a space that you might not be comfortable with, but take the chance. So I guess we're on to how we get there.
Yeah, and I do want to make a comment about, I think mentoring, because I am a big advocate of mentoring as well, and I want to give it credit. I do believe now mentoring has become a very much a big thing in the organizations, and it's not silent anymore. That there are mentoring programs, people are being seen and said, oh yeah, that's so-and-so's mentee or mentor. So I do believe that's happening. And
I don't think we're saying that one is better than the other. They just have different outcome results.
Right. And somebody
wrote clear.
Right. And somebody wrote something about, oh, I think I'm more into sponsorship. Sometimes mentoring a sponsor can be a mentor as well. But sometimes a mentor, most likely a mentor cannot be a sponsor. But sometimes you will have a sponsor that's mentoring as well.
Right.
But and I want to just leave with one other thing as well, is that like what I've been looking at is making sure in organizations, how do we have this in organizations, is making sure that there's mutual responsibility. So it's just as much my responsibility as it is the organization's responsibility to create an environment from sponsorship. So organizations need to make sure that they're creating a culture of sponsorship. So people are looking to see, okay, well, who could I sponsor? And then individuals are taking responsibility for, I've come up with 6 things that are needed to be looked at as a sponsor. One being performance, one being your presence, one being a purpose. So I think it's that mutual responsibility for the organization as well as the individual to help cultivate that sponsorship relationship, as well. And that's from my point of view. So, all right. Should I go over this slide, or since I'm talking? But yeah, okay. So how do we get there? Like okay, now that we've talked about this to you, what does this mean to y'all? Well, when you're looking at sponsorship, sponsorship requires a proactive attitude and commitment. So again, as I just said, it requires a commitment from you as an individual, and also requires a commitment from the sponsor as well as the organization. So making sure that you're being proactive around that, and it's an attitude and a commitment. And actually, I would probably say the same thing, across the board here, as well as making sure to be explicit about the economically beneficial relationship, like what's in it for each one of you in the relationship. As we would discuss before, it's a social exchange. It's you rub my back, I'm going to rub yours in some ways. Okay. And I've heard that to be true. I've heard friends that say, yeah, like he advocated for me, he supported me, and I've been helping his group do X, Y, and Z. So there is what's in it for me in that syndrome as well as a sponsor. So then when you're looking at mentoring, you want to make sure, so mentors are going to help you to get your goals, and they're going to help to support you. So you want to make sure that you have expectations right up front, that you're open and honest in your communication with them, and you have clarity around your expectations. Again, I would probably put some of that stuff also in sponsorship as well, not only being proactive and committed, but also making sure you have those expectations and you have some clarity there. And lastly, around support. So we all need support systems. So having those support systems at work and at home are so vital. Especially for us to have the capacity to move in the roles of our career goals. I'm kind of reminded. I remember when I was a little bit younger. I was talking to my brother. I'm like, how do women do it? And I'm not married. I don't have children either. And I'm like, well, how do women do it all, right? Like, how do they have a family? And my brother said, well, they have a support system, and this is coming from a man. And so women need to have those support systems as well. So making sure that you either create one, ask for one, or help someone if they don't have one, if you see that they need support. So those are just a few things that could help you when it comes to making sure that you're advocating for some of the getting one of these things, and getting a sponsor, a mentor, or support for your career.
Okay, just to quickly summarize, there are many myths when it comes to women at work. Our path is going to look different. Women's pathways look different. Mentoring is about developing the person, and sponsorship is really about networking the person. And each of us, we need to know who's in our network. We need to grow it. We need to develop support for ourselves at work and at home. And think about who is our mentor and who could be our sponsor, and how we can mentor and sponsor others so that we can accelerate ourselves in our career.
Right.
So if you want to just type in the chat as we continue to the Q&A, if you can name one thing you're taking away today, we would love to know what it is and how you're going to use it in your career. That would be amazing for us to learn from you what this practical application looks like. And Solange is going to tell us about her book that she's written.
Yes, an unabashed plug for a book that Stella Lapouchore and I co-authored that was published late last year. There's a QR code there that will take you to our book's website, and then you can purchase the book at any place that you like to purchase your books from. We don't want to push Amazon on you, so there's all the outlets are there. And this month we are introducing a newsletter and some blogs. So if you link into me, we've got a slide with everyone's LinkedIn information. You'll be able to access that blog post, that newsletter. Sign up for the newsletter. We'll push it to you, or we'll make sure that you get it. So the book is called Humanizing Human Capital: Invest in Your People for Optimal Business Returns. And I hope that you'll all get a copy. Please. Thank you.
And if you want to do a little more reading, we were published in the Harvard Business Review a few years ago, and this was kind of the beginning of our collaboration. And it's an article called Why Men Have More Help Getting to the C-Suite, and that'll really take you through a lot of the mentoring and sponsorship conversation that we covered today in more detail. So if we have time for Q&A, it looks like we're about out of time. What will our moderator say about that?
We do have a couple questions. So let's see, Velma, if we're allowed to do just actually one question that's here on the Q&A. And I don't know if this is a quick question, but how would you advise women who may come to realize they aren't being sponsored to address this with their managers or leaders? She meets a lot of women who still follow keep my head down protocol, and the work eventually will show itself.
Yeah, and I know Sarah, so thank you for asking this question. And I think I covered it a little bit, but women, so just right now, I felt so uncomfortable asking people to buy my book. Like, do you think a man would have been uncomfortable asking people to buy their book? So we really just have to move through our, our uncomfort zone, our discomfort zone, and just acknowledge, like, I got all shy and, demure when I asked you, and I'm thinking to myself, why am I doing that? So just be aware of the fact when your pattern of behavior falls into a gender specific way that's not serving you, and speak up. Ask for what you want, because the worst thing that can happen is someone will say no. And the best thing that will happen is that someone will say yes. And when somebody says no to you, you're not any worse off after the no than you were before the no. So you don't lose anything. You just have to move past that, oh, I shouldn't ask for help. Be brave, step up, and ask for what you want.
And my take is that you don't have to have a sponsor in your company, and you don't have to have a mentor in your company. It does help to have that mentor, as we talked about. They help you to navigate the organization. I have mentors all over, like from different industries. So I invite you to have a mentor, whether that mentor is in your company or not. And sponsor, obviously you want you can have sponsors outside of your company too.
Yep.
Because they have the same positions are in other places. There's a very large company, their CIO is my mentor. I saw him at a conference. He's the same nationality as me, and I was like so enthralled with that. I just kind of stalked him, followed up with him, and I have conversations with him, and I made that happen. He gives me feedback. He supports me in things that I naturally wouldn't maybe not have even from my own company, my own organization. So, be creative, go outside of the box as well.
Yeah, I support both of the things that you all said. And I just want to encourage whoever asked that question, think about who, maybe draw a diagram, who in my circle do I want to be my mentor or sponsor that I had hoped that they were doing it and they're not. Okay, well then next person, who else is there? And who do I need to be intentional about connecting with and kind of talking with about this relationship? So I would just say, draw a diagram, map it out, think about all the people that you touch. You'd be surprised how many people you touch and how many people probably would want to help you and
Right.
how many people you could help.
Well, on behalf of the Women's Caucus from ACRO, I really want to say thank you to all three of our presenters today and Melissa for helping to facilitate the session. I think there was some lively discussion, and hopefully participants today have been able to learn something new and have some takeaways. So I greatly appreciate you taking time today to join us. I believe this will be a recorded session and posted on our website, on the ACRO website later. Belma shaking your head, yes. So if you want to share this with colleagues, that would be a great opportunity to do that and to expand the ACRO Women's Caucus reach as well. So thank you so much for all of your time and participation today.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you to the participants for being interested and staying with
Right.
us.